Alright, I'm going to do a little rig rundown now that my setup is complete. Really stoked with how this has turned out, so I thought I'd do a little video to document how it's all set up and configured. So, just to start from the beginning, on this side of the room, we've got rig A with the Soldano 30 watt and the Marshall SLP 100 watt. And on this side of the room, rig B with the Komet Trainwreck and the Amplified Nation overdrive reverb. Now, signal flow wise, this is where it gets really fun. So, starting with this cable here, well, first of all, this cable here goes straight into the Apollo back here. So that's for things like Amplitube and Tonex and Neural DSP and all the, software-based stuff. And that's all really fun stuff, but that's for another time, because today is about the real hardware. So, back down here, this cable running from the guitar going over to the pedal board is where it all starts. So, through the pedals, out of the pedals, back over here to this ABY switch. So from this switcher, it branches out into both sides of the room. So out of this switcher into whichever rig I have selected, from the output of that switcher to the input of this switcher, the amp switcher. So out of the amp switcher into the heads, out of the heads back into the switcher, out of the switcher into the UA aux, which I absolutely love, by the way, more on that later. Out of the aux, both into the Marshall cab and via optical into the Apollo, and therefore my computer. So same thing on this side, from the second output of the ABY switcher, or the B output, over here into the amp switcher, out of the amp switcher into the heads, out of the heads back into the switcher, out of the switcher into the Apollo, out of the Apollo both into the Komet cab and via optical, running back behind all this stuff, into the Apollo. Now, one little caveat, anyone who knows the Apollo knows it only has one optical input, and so I do have an optical switcher on the back of my monitor stand here. So just have to go back here, tap a button, and that switches which optical input is live. So there is that, but a small price to pay for having this all in sort of one centralized command station. So that's the rig. It's glorious, it sounds killer. I've got all the levels set, so everything's normalized coming in, and it's just a whole lot of fun. So how does it all work from a practical standpoint? How do I switch? How does it sound? I'm glad you asked. All right, so how does this all work when I'm in here playing around and want to switch between amps? Better question, how does it all sound? So again, back to the ABY switcher down here. I don't have a camera down here, I'm not that fancy, but you'll just have to remember that there's a foot switch right down here which switches from either side of the room. So with that, I switch from rig A to rig B over here. So depending on what I want to play, I just hit the foot switch down there, and then remember there is an optical switch on the back of my monitor stand which switches the optical input from either side. So there are two switches that I have to do. Now, one really tweaky question, which would be fair, would be why not have the ABY pedal just set to Y, meaning signal is going from there to both sides, since I have to switch the optical input anyway. Sorry if this is getting too geeky, but the answer to that is that we live in a house built in the 1950s, and the power draw from having 4 tube amps on at the same time will shut this down. It's end of party. So I've learned can only have 2 of these on at once. hence having to switch the ABY. So anyway, so yeah, let's dig in. We'll start with digging into the aux a little bit. As you can see, when you first fire it up, you do have to choose which aux you're looking at. So I have the Soldano next to me, and I've got the Komet over here to the right. So we're going to start with the Soldano, which also controls the Marshall. So just to run through this real quick, I mean, this could be a whole video on how amazing this piece of hardware and software is. So again, this is the UA aux, which for people who aren't familiar is an amp attenuator. So I can also play all of these heads through the actual cabinets and have it turned way down. They call it bedroom level. So basically, Tracy is asleep next door, and I can play a 100-watt head so quiet that it doesn't, wake up my wife sleeping right next door, which is pretty nice. But for the purpose of this is all about bringing it into the computer, listening through headphones, listening through my monitors, doing videos and stuff like this. This all goes back to the guitar school that I'm in, where we have to submit videos on multiple times a week on our progress and lessons and everything. So hence going down this rabbit hole and getting really geeky with it. But man, I'm having so much fun. So yes, the aux software. So you have all kinds of choices here. There are all of these cabinet options, which again could be a whole other video. There are all these microphone options for both mics, plus room mics. And then you've got your tone shaping section on the master fader. So, you've got your EQ, you've got an 1176 compressor, you've got digital delay, and a plate reverb, which I always have on. It sounds so good. This is a great sounding reverb, and it just opens it up a bit so that it doesn't sound like you're playing in super dead room. So you can save presets, of course, so you can have a different preset for each physical amp. I don't tend to do that. I kind of just stick with the same thing each time, because the one I found, I did go through and tweak all this stuff, and now I'm just set. It just sounds so good. So let's get into how it sounds. All right, I'm going to run through these pretty quick, just so you can get sort of an idea of how these different amps sound coming through the software. Won't be any fancy playing happening, only because I'm not capable. Believe me, if I could shred your face off, I would, but I'm working on that. For now, we're just going to run through these pretty quick. You can get an idea, sort of the reason behind all this, if you're not familiar with any of this. And if you are, you can hear how these different amps sound. So we'll start with the Marshall SLP, otherwise known as a Plexi. I'm going to mute my vocal mic here so you're not hearing strumming sounds and room sounds and stuff. So we're just going to be hearing the input of the aux. All right, so then we'll switch over to the Soldano, which means just reaching over here to the amp switcher and clicking the button. So we'll start with the clean. But nobody buys a Soldano to play it clean. So that's the Marshall and the Soldano on this side. Now, of course, I mean, it should go without saying, but just to drive the point home, any tweaks I make on these amps will be reflected in what I'm playing here. So just in case that wasn't clear. Okay, now to the other side of the room. Let's play around with the Komet and the Amplified Nation. And so we'll start with the Komet. I've got it turned down, therefore have a nice clean sound. Mute my mic again. All right, so now I'm going to turn the Komet up so you can hear the nice, beautiful distortion. So, it just occurred to me, we haven't talked about any of these pedals yet. That's a whole other video. I don't have a ton of pedals, but I do love the pedals that I have. Quality over quantity, right? So one of my newest ones is Death by Audio Fuzz War, which is just a glorious fuzz pedal. So I'll throw that in for a second. All right, so last but certainly not least, the Amplified Nation Overdrive Reverb. Now, for those not in the know, this is the closest thing you can get to a Dumble, or one of the closest. I don't want to start an internet war. One of the closest you can get to a Dumble without spending $100,000. And it sounds so good. So without further ado, let's hear it. All right, so we'll start with the clean channel. Now, the distorted channel. All right, I think that about wraps it up. I could obviously go into a lot more detail with each of the amps, a lot of tones that you can get out of these things, and then obviously pedal board, a whole lot of stuff to play with, but that'll have to be for another time. Just wanted to give general overview of signal flow, how it's all routed together more or less, and how each of these sounds. So yeah, hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you have any questions.